Hello and welcome to Web 125 Digital Video Tools. I'm your professor for this course, Whitney Bandel. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be in class today, so I recorded this video lecture instead to give you an idea of an overview for the course, but then also to let you know what to do for week one. So we're going to go ahead and log into Canvas. If you haven't used Canvas before, you can go to the JCCC website and then go to login. From here you have the option of going to Canvas, and then it will prompt you to put in your username and password. You can log in. We'll want to make sure that we choose our class. Everything that's in the class is going to be posted to Canvas, so you can go here for all of your information. To start off with, we're going to take a look at the announcement. So I went ahead and sent this out to all of you to give you an idea of what to expect and what to do for this first week. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be in class because I have a family emergency and I'm going to be out of town over the weekend. But to start off with, I want you to watch this video. It should cover everything that you need to know for this first week as we're getting started. I will need to report attendance for this first week of class to say who was present or not, since we're not going to be able to meet face-to-face and since I wasn't able to get a substitute. Instead, what I'm going to do is create a discussion where I'm going to have you post in that with an introduction. You can just give an idea of your name, what your area of study is. You could post what your kind of career aspiration is or what area you work in currently, and then some hobbies just so we can get to know you. And then I'm going to be using your post in the discussion as your attendance. So make sure that you post there. Everything for the course will be under the modules section. So I have this first section, which is an overview for the course. And then I also have week one. So you'll want to go to the overview where there's going to be this introductions discussion, but there's also on the left in this navigation, you can go down to discussions and you'll be able to see a post here as well. I've gone ahead and posted directions here. Please reply here and introduce yourself to the rest of the class. Some suggestions are, and then I've gone ahead and I've introduced myself, so you can read this and then you can go ahead and reply. Be sure to check out the overview module as well as week one. The overview is going to give a general idea for the course, and then week one will actually cover the content for this week. If you have any issues with figuring out the coursework or just have questions you want more elaborated on, you can email me, or you can also come to my office hours. I'm not going to be available this Monday during my scheduled office hours, so instead I'm going to be coming in on Tuesday from 11 to 2, or from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. So you can stop by during that time if you need to talk, or during my other regular scheduled times, Wednesday and Thursday. So to start off with, we're going to take a look at the syllabus. You can go ahead and read through this on your own. I'm going to touch on some key areas. So like I said, my name's Whitney Bandel. A little bit of background information about myself, kind of in addition to the introduction. I typically teach in the digital media side of the web development digital media program. I teach a lot of the classes that cover video editing and other Adobe software. So if you're interested in taking more digital media classes, you'll probably run into me more. Some background information about me, I posted this as well, but I originally studied drawing and painting as part of my BFA. And then in graduate school, I started working more with time arts, which typically includes video, audio, animation. In my thesis studies, I was studying interactive art, which was using controllers and cameras to change and manipulate audio video playback. So that's kind of the range of what I typically work with. I also teach HTML and CSS classes, so you may have seen me around teaching those as well. So if you want to email me, you can send me messages through Canvas, or you can use this email address, wbandel@jccc.edu. This is my phone extension for my office. My office location is the Regner Center 330. From where our classroom is, it's actually right across the hall, so it's super convenient. Usually I'm around before and after class, so if you aren't able to come in during my regular office hours, you can usually find me before or after if you have another question that you want to ask outside of class. My regular scheduled office hours are Mondays 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., Wednesdays 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., and then Thursdays 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. For this course, we're going to use Canvas for everything. That's going to include taking quizzes, looking up assignments, posting and submitting your homework. Class meeting times are going to be Fridays from 11 a.m. to 1:50 p.m. in the Regner Center 323. This class is face-to-face, 1 credit hour. There is a textbook for this class, which is Adobe Premiere Pro CC 2017 release, Classroom in a Book. And you can look for digital purposes, purchases, or bookstore rental copies at the library if you want. For the textbook, I have readings. I'm going to scroll down. But I have readings that correlate with the content we're going to go over in class. So for example, the book chapters 1 through 3 will correlate with the content that we're going to look at in class this week. Because the book is formatted more like a tutorial book, it's not necessarily going to be a typical textbook reading. So I tend to think of it more as a suggested reading rather than required. The quizzes that we're going to have in class are going to ask questions over the content from the lectures in class. The quizzes aren't going to cover content from the book. So you don't have to do this reading in order to be able to answer the quizzes. The book is really great, and it does teach you just the scope and the pacing of the book doesn't quite match up with a 5-week course. So you can definitely check that out. Some other required materials. You are going to need to get your own subscription to Adobe Premiere Pro. The newest edition of Premiere Pro, the way the computer lab works is you're going to have to sign in with your own subscription every class, and then you're going to need to sign out. So if you haven't gotten an Adobe subscription before, you can go to the Adobe website. I'm not really a fan of their navigation because I feel like it's a little hard to find. View all plans, because I know there's going to be, here we go, students and teachers. Here you can do all apps for $20 a month. So you can do paid monthly or prepaid. So if you want to do just the 1 month, which would cover this class, you could start that even next week. So that way it's just for the next 4 weeks would be fine. And then during that time, you could also try out some of the other software. All right, so you're gonna need Premiere Pro. I also recommend getting Adobe Media Encoder. Adobe Media Encoder is a software that is just for encoding your files. It makes it really convenient when you are exporting and rendering out your files. It gives you more options for choosing different file formats. It's just a really great tool to use in general, but it's not something that you have to have. And I can demonstrate how you would use it once we actually get to the point of exporting your files. In addition, you need to have some way of saving your files in a physical format. It's up to you if you want to use a thumb drive, if you have an external hard drive. The files we're going to be working with shouldn't take up too much space, so if you already have a thumb drive, it'll probably work perfectly fine. In addition, you can use your student Google Drive space or any other cloud storage that you have. I tend to suggest having 2 different copies, a copy that might be saved to a cloud storage and then one that's physical, just so that way you don't have to worry about if the internet's not working very well and it's acting really slow, you still are able to access your files. An SD card is optional. We don't really have cameras that can be checked out. There is a media center that is just next door. So if we were to look at this map, this room here is us, and then the media lab right here, it's next to the stairs and the elevator. So in this media lab, you can actually go in and you can check out equipment. The equipment that we have though is we have a couple of those flip cameras where they have the USB part that flips out, so they're sort of outdated. Really, your smartphones at this point can really do better recordings than those cameras. So I usually just suggest, for the sake of this class, to just record with like a smartphone, or if you have another camera that's capable of video. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on editing, not so much on capturing footage. So I'm not going to judge your work based off of the camera that you were able to use. But if you did have a camera that required an SD card, you would want to make sure that you have an SD card to record your footage. You will want to have headphones. And if you plan on doing a lot of video work in the future, I would say it's a good opportunity to purchase nicer quality headphones if you don't have some already. Really, I'm just looking for any sort of headphones. If you have some old headphones that work with like your old CD player or something, maybe your family members have one lying around, you can bring that in. I really don't want you to use earbuds. First of all, they go into your ears, and so the way that you're listening to the audio is very different. It's not going to be the same experience as listening to headphones that go outside of your ears. And then also, if you're having an audio problem and you need me to hear it in order to help troubleshoot it, I'm not going to be using your earbuds. So you really want to make sure that you bring in headphones so that way you can actually edit your audio. You will be required to create a YouTube account for handing in projects. Because your student emails are linked with Gmail anyways, you really don't have to worry about setting up a YouTube account. You should have one that's essentially already made with your student email. I have had questions before about students who might already have a YouTube account and if they can post content to that YouTube account. I would suggest keeping your files separate so that way you aren't mixing up your student work with your professional work, and kind of changing your channel's image. When you're turning in work, you can post your work so that it is unlisted. I don't want you to post it so that way it's completely private, because then I won't be able to see it to grade it. But if you are worried about people seeing your videos, you can post them so that they're unlisted. I have the suggestion to wait to purchase your materials until after this lecture, just so that way you have some context when you're deciding what things that you want to purchase. Course description, I'll let you read through this. Course objectives, course outline and competencies. We're basically going to work through each of these project by project. We're going to have 3 projects that we're going to go through. You can go to the catalog course description at this link. Canvas information, all information will be assigned and disseminated through Canvas. Make sure that you know how to get onto Canvas and how to use your student ID and password. Computer literacy expectations. Students will need to know basic word processing and internet searching skills. It is helpful if you have a basic understanding of file storage and how to organize your files. So you're going to have 3 assignments. The first is going to be assigned today. That's to create a self-portrait. Then we're going to have the second project, titles and effects. And then the final project is going to be an instructional video. In addition to that, there's going to be 2 different quizzes. They're going to be assigned on Canvas, and you're going to log into Canvas. And what's going to happen is I'm going to assign it 1 week, and then you're going to have until the next week to log into Canvas, take the quiz online, and then submit it. Something to consider when taking the quiz is when you log in and start taking the quiz, you can't save your progress and stop. So you want to make sure that you're not going to be easily distracted by things going on around you, that you aren't going to accidentally have your window closed, because you won't be able to log back in to finish it. If you do experience some sort of technical problem though, you can let me know and I can figure out another way for you to take the quiz. Participation, you will be required to discuss topics, present your work, and provide constructive feedback about your colleagues' work. Part of each assignment grade will be based on your participation during critique. Ideas and comments that intentionally cause any physical or emotional harm to another student or anyone else will not be accepted. Attendance is mandatory and taken at the beginning of class. If you arrive after attendance has been taken, it is your responsibility to notify the instructor after class. Excessive absences will obviously affect the quality of your work. It is impossible to make up for the planned and spontaneous information experience in class. Your consistent presence, not only in body, but also in motivated and industrious learning behavior, will significantly impact your grade. If you miss a class, you're responsible for class material and the assignment. All absences, whether excused or not, will count toward your grade. 3 late arrivals will count as a class absence. If you have 2 absences, your grade will be dropped by a whole letter grade. Except for extreme circumstances, 3 or more absences constitutes an F for this class. So I've got overview of this information. This is the same thing, it's just listed again, so it's a little easier to browse. Here I have information about faculty initiated withdrawal. That's talking about if you're not present during the first week of class, that you'll be withdrawn from the course. Student initiated withdrawal, faculty initiated withdrawal. This is if somebody were to miss multiple weeks, they're not turning in any work. I try to email them and contact them about it and they don't respond. I have the option of withdrawing them rather than giving them a failing grade. For more information on the student attendance operating procedure, I have a link here. Grading assignments are to be completed on time. Each day the project is late, the grade will be lowered 1 letter grade. If you feel a piece is incomplete or questionable, still bring it to class for critique. This is really important. This class goes really fast and it is an introductory course. So there might be a case where you weren't able to figure something out on your own outside of class. And it could be something really simple where we're still able to talk about it and talk about what your intentions were. So no matter what, bring your work to look at and we can always take a look at it and figure out what's not working with it. Any appeal for grades must be brought to the instructor during office hours or at a scheduled time convenient to both parties. If for some reason you can't meet during my office hours, send me an email and we'll try to figure out a time that would work. Incomplete grades will only be granted for the death of a family member during the semester or a note from a doctor documenting a hospitalization representing a significant period of time. If you have some sort of family emergency or something that doesn't quite fit this description, you can still come and talk to me and we can figure out if that still applies. Only if given the final grade of incomplete will additional work after the conclusion of a semester be accepted. Grades are not curved and adhere to the following scale. You can read through that. Classroom etiquette, cell phone, technology. Being a part of this class requires being respectful and displaying proper behavior towards others, oneself, in the classroom environment. This includes being respectful of the property of others, as well as restraining from using negative speech and attitude towards others. We want to create a positive learning environment where people can work together to be successful. This includes turning off cell phones, music devices, and computers unless otherwise instructed by the instructor. Cell phones and other devices are to be off and stored during class. If you have an emergency, alert the instructor at the beginning of class. What I really mean by this is let me know as soon as possible. If you need to step out and leave early, you can always send me an email later after the fact. I understand we all have people who may need to contact us. So just try to be discreet. you can have your phones on silent or on vibrate. Again, we just don't want them to be an interruption to the learning experience. Exhibition. I customarily document student assignments, which I may want to reproduce with credit in my scholarly work. What this is talking about is I often will put student examples up on a portfolio page of student work, so that way future students can see what other people have done, so they have an idea of how they're going to be assessed in their own projects. So a lot of times, especially with YouTube videos, I'll link to the YouTube video itself, and then that way you can kind of track how many people are viewing your page and they're going directly to your work. Plagiarism is a type of cheating that involves the use of another person's ideas, words, design, art, music, etc. as one's own in whole or in part without acknowledging the author or obtaining his or her permission. Plagiarism is not just restricted to written text, but is applicable to other works such as ideas, design, art, and music. So here's an overview of different types of plagiarism. Student code of conduct, as well as the student handbook information. ADA compliance. JCCC provides a range of services to allow persons with disabilities to participate in educational programs and activities. If you are a student with a disability and if you are in need of accommodations or services, it is your responsibility to contact Access Services and make a formal request. So here I have contact information for that. A link to Access Services, a link to Americans with Disabilities Act information, website accessibility information. This is a link for counseling resources, campus safety information, report emergencies to campus police who are available 24 hours a day, in person at the Carlson Center, CC 115. Here I have the direct line, which I really like their tip of programming the information to your cell phone so you can find it really quickly. There's also the Guardian app, which you can download for your phone. Instant panic button and texting capability to campus police. There is an anonymous reports to Cops Watch at the link or this phone number. Be alert, you are an extra set of eyes and ears to help maintain campus safety. Trust your instincts. Report suspicious or unusual behavior. Be prepared. Identify the red, white, stripe building emergency response posters throughout campus and online that show egress routes, shelter, and equipment. So usually around each doorway, typically you'll see a poster that's going to have information. It kind of looks a little bit like this poster. It should have a map on it and then also a legend that gives more information. Usually you'll find these next to the doorways. We'll take a look at ours in a second. View Alice training, which you can watch. Familiarize yourself with the college emergency response plan. This is a really helpful link, especially if you want to look up other places that you'll often be on campus, so you can kind of know how to react during an emergency. Notifications, alerts are sent to all employees and students using email and text messaging. This is a reason why I understand why it's important to have your cell phone, so that way if there is a notice, we can all be contacted. So I understand we do need to be plugged into the technology. Weapons policy, effective July 1st, 2017, concealed carry handguns are permitted in JCCC buildings subject to the restrictions set forth in the weapons policy. Handgun safety training is encouraged for all who choose to conceal carry. Suspected violations should be reported to JCCC Police Department. So disaster plan, there's a map here. Like I mentioned before, this is our classroom. And if we look at the legend, you can see that because it's grayed out, it actually counts as a storm security area. So if there was a tornado or anything, we could actually stay in place where we are at. The next closest locations would be the men's and women's restrooms, which are just down the hallway from this. As far as needing to leave the building in order to evacuate, There are 2 stairs that are kind of close to us. If you go outside of our classroom and then down the hall, in the corner is a stairwell here. It's not the most noticeable, but there is one. And then possibly more familiar if you know where the elevators are, kind of in the center, and then there's these clear stairs that go up and down. These would be the other stairs that we could go through. And once we're in the classroom, you'll notice that there's actually 2 doorways here. There's the main door that you're going to come through, and then there's also this other door that connects to this media lab. So if we needed to, we could actually go through this door, through the media lab, and out to these stairs if we needed. We don't necessarily have to go all the way around. Speaking of the media lab, you can go in here and use the computers if you need to. If there is not a class going on in this classroom, you can also come in, check in into the media lab with your student ID, and you can actually come in here and work on these computers as well. So those are definitely options. Syllabus change policy. While every attempt is made to provide an accurate overview of the course, unanticipated circumstances or events may make it necessary for the instructor to modify the syllabus during the semester. Such circumstances may arise as a consequence of the progress, needs, and experiences of the students, or may result from other strenuous circumstances. Changes to the syllabus will be made with advance notice so as not to disadvantage students. Should the indicated change present any unanticipated difficulties, please contact the instructor immediately. So the fact that I'm having to record this video would be a particular example. For the most part, I'm planning on us going by the same schedule. Usually this first week I go over the syllabus, and then I also open up Premiere and I show you around the workspace and just kind of the general workflow, introduce the first project, and then usually the second class I go over those things again, especially once you've gotten your own software so you can log into the computers, which you will need to have for next time. So I'm not anticipating any issues where we need to change the schedule, but if you do feel like there is a problem, you can let me know and we can see if we can reassess. Drop deadlines. So here's an overview of the class schedule. So the first week, we're going to take a look at workflow and file management. I'm going to assign the first project. Then the chapters that correlate with the topics we're going to talk about are going to be kind of chapters 1 through 3 approximately. A lot of it's talking about file management. Then week 2, we're going to talk about media, editing tools, rendering. That's when we're really going to start working with the program. Again, I'm going to go over everything so that way we have more practice. This is when I'm going to assign the first quiz. And so what's going to happen is you will have from March 6th until March 13th before class to complete the quiz. March 13th, the first project is going to be due. We're going to introduce transitions, effects, and titles. I'm going to assign the second and the third project. The second project is going to be more of a tutorial. I'm going to give you a bunch of files to play around with. And then the third project, you can already start thinking about ideas for what you want to do. You could start recording video. Then we're going to have spring break. Your titles and effects project will be due, so that's just going to be a short project. You can continue working on that third one, and then we'll have the last week. And what I've typically experienced with the last project is that since the class is so short and we just need as much time as possible, usually for the last project I'd let it be due at the end of the day rather than at the end of class, so that way we can actually work into that last week. Usually I have everyone show their work as sort of a work in progress, so we can still critique and take a look at it. And then for each of these classes, I have a demo that we're going to do so we can practice different skills as we go along. All right, so I have this getting started section that you can take a look at on your own. I'll let you read that. I typically hand out this student information sheet during the first class. This just lets me get to know everyone better. I would like for you to print this out and to fill it in. If needed, I can always bring copies next week. You don't have to put anything that you don't want to. Mostly this is just for the sake of me being able to have a copy of a signed paper saying that you've looked at the syllabus, you understand what's in it, sign it, date it. But I asked, like, what is your major? How far are you in the program? Are you a commuter? Really, everyone's commuting, but what's helpful here, and you can add, is like if you're driving from a really far distance. Like I have students who drive from Lawrence or Topeka, or you could even put, like, are you leaving to work right after class, or are you coming from work? Where anything that could potentially make it so it's difficult for you to show up right on time. What's your cell phone number? This would be just used in the case of an emergency. You don't have to put anything. What is your strongest trait as a student? What is your weakest trait? Is there anything I need to know about you better to understand you and your learning needs? Again, you don't have to put anything if you don't want. If you have anything where you need an actual accommodation for the class, then you would want to make sure that you go and you talk to Access Services. What would you like to gain from this class, and how could it tie into your personal work? And then sign your name and date. So at the least, I'm just looking for you to sign it and date it. And then here I have the introductions. So make sure that you take a look at that. And then now we're just going to go ahead and take a look at week 1. All right, video basics. So looking at different equipment, you need to have some sort of camera that you can record with. Again, I'm perfectly fine with you using a smartphone. We're really mostly looking for the ability to just edit work. If you want to, you can use a web camera. You can use a screen recording of content on your screen. It just sort of depends on the project and what you're trying to do. The picture here actually is a pretty good representation of the type of cameras that we have in the media lab. So that's sort of what you can expect if you did want to check something out. You need to have something to save your files to, whether it's a thumb drive or an external SD card. If you are recording footage, I would highly suggest that you find a way to stabilize your camera. We have a tendency to move our arms a lot when we're trying to record with your hands. So anything that you can do to actually put your camera on something stable, whether it's a tripod or just trying to prop it, is going to just help you get better footage. Professional grade headphones. Now, depending on the camera that you're using, you're going to have different video recording settings. Nowadays, smartphones are starting to get more and more options. I'm not going to go too much into the recording settings, but if you have a camera and you want me to talk to you about how your camera works, you can always bring it in and we can take a look at it. Frame sizes and aspect ratios. So this is going to be important when you are recording and you're choosing how you want to record your footage. So the frame size is going to be the width times the height. So an example would be 720 by 480. That's going to basically be the resolution that you're looking at. The frame aspect ratio is going to be the ratio of the width to the height. You might be familiar with 4:3 or 16:9. So each of these that match in color are the same aspect ratio. They just have different numbers of pixels in them. So that makes the resolution higher. So if you are recording, you usually want to go with a larger resolution. So in this case, you might want to go with like 1920 by 1080. It sort of also is a balance of file size, where you wouldn't want to record everything in such a large file size that you run out of space. This used to be more of a problem when SD cards were really expensive and it was hard to get enough storage space, but nowadays you should be fine without worrying about that. This is kind of a little joke, but we're so used to holding our phones vertically. So when people do start recording video with their phones, they typically tend to record their videos vertically instead of horizontally. So this is just kind of a notice that you should be making sure to record horizontally rather than vertically. I know a lot of people will frown at the idea of recording video vertically. This isn't to say that there isn't a time and place for it. So this is suggesting when we're looking at media on a monitor or on a television, we're looking at it horizontally. There is a lot of video that is being made and consumed vertically. Like if you think about videos that are posted on Facebook or Instagram, a lot of people are scrolling through their feed and they're actually looking at content that was recorded maybe as part of a live video stream. And we're starting to look at content in a variety of different ways. Some apps will record video in a square aspect ratio. So I'm not saying that there's not a future in this, but if you are planning on having your videos watched in a traditional way, then you would want to record your videos in a traditional way. So in this class, I would just say record everything horizontally. Frames per second is the number of frames recorded per second. The more frames that you have per second, the clearer your imagery is going to be. When you have fewer frames per second, your image is going to start blurring together. Here we can actually see these distinct frames. Here I have some kind of outdated suggestions. This is saying that if you are recording just regular footage, that you can pick 720p, whether it's going to be 30 frames or 60 frames per second. This is saying that if you were going to be doing a lot of post-production editing, like with green screen, that you would want to use a higher resolution. This is to help suggest how you could potentially create smaller file sizes. Again, nowadays you can pretty much record 1080p no matter what, 60 frames per second, and it's not a big deal. Lighting and focus. Many of our handheld cameras have fixed focuses and automatic lighting, so you should be mindful of how you are setting up your shot to work with the camera. For advanced cameras, you'll want to have a basic understanding of white balance, focus, sound levels, and lighting. Things to consider are color temperature and creating consistency from shot to shot. So thinking about the kind of lighting that you have. If you're recording at home, I understand that you're going to have certain limitations. Usually the best lighting situations are to record outside, just because you're going to have cooler lighting and you're going to have kind of more of an even lighting, versus if you were trying to record indoors, which is going to have a harsher lighting and it's going to be a lot warmer. You might have dramatic shadows on your face, which could end up being distracting depending on the angle and the composition. So the hotter the light, the cooler it's going to look. It sounds a little backwards because of the colors, but something to keep into consideration. So again, outdoors, you're going to have the bluest light because it's going to be the hottest from the sun. 3-point lighting. So I'm not expecting you to set up 3-point lighting for your shots, but when you are setting up lighting, it's a good idea to try to place a main light, your key light, on the subject, usually about a 45-degree angle, so kind of a 3/4 view, and then use another light as a fill light to help fill in the other side of your face, keep it from getting too harsh of shadows. And then a lot of times we want to use a backlight, also known as hair light, to help light up the back of the figure. This helps them pop out from the background. Here's an example of that. So on the left, we have that key light, which is lighting up the most of the face. And then in order to keep the other side from having too harsh of shadows, we have a fill light that's coming in from underneath. It's making the face look more three-dimensional. And then we have a backlight, which is helping illuminate the shoulders and then also the hair, so that way he stands out from the background behind him. Things to also consider: lighting the background. Depending on the background that you are in, you might need to have lights to help illuminate that space as well. This is an example from a green screen recording studio that I used to use, where we would have figures stand on this platform. We would use these top lights up here as the fill light and the key light, and then we could also use these lights down here to help light up the space. We could use some of these rolling around lights to help pop the back of the figure, but then we also had these lights up here to create an even light. In this case, it really mattered that we had an even light, because with the green screen, we want to make sure that we have an even tone to work with when we're editing. Framing and composition. These are some suggestions for how you can kind of start, starting with the rule of thirds. So by dividing up the space horizontally and vertically into thirds and putting key points on those intersections, you can make the composition much more interesting. This video I'd like for you to watch is going to go over different information on working with compositions and framing. I really like this picture because it's a good example of how somebody could be lined up. Their eyes are on that top mark. And then something to also consider is looking across the space. So this would be a much different composition if he was actually lined up facing the same way, but on this intersection. If he was looking outside of the frame, our eyes would be drawn to look outside of the frame rather than into the content. So if somebody's looking across the space, it's better to have them closer to the edge, so that way they're bringing us into the composition rather than out of the visual plane. Another way that you can kind of think about compositions is using the golden ratio. This is a ratio that breaks down content into smaller and smaller parts. It's a natural ratio that we see in everyday like flowers and shells in nature. And so we're very drawn to that pattern. Importing files to Premiere, we're going to take a look at this, but something to know, and this is kind of hard to explain until you actually start working with the files, is Premiere is a work table. When you're bringing in your files, you're creating a shortcut to your files. Your files don't permanently exist in that workspace until you actually save and export your files and turn them into a video. So if you change the location of your files while you're working on them, you're going to break that link and it's not going to be able to see them anymore. So it's really important. Usually I suggest put all of your files in one folder, save your project file, and then bring all of your files with each other in that folder. So that way they're still retaining that local relationship to each other. Here's some export setting information. We're going to go over this again. I like to put this in here as sort of a little cheat sheet so you can go back and you can double check. So kind of going over, like, go to File, Export Media. In this case, you don't have to do Vimeo. You could do YouTube 720p. We do want to choose H.264. That's going to turn the file into an MP4, which is going to be a more common file type that is viewable both on Mac and PC. So it's going to be better. You're going to want to make sure that you set up a YouTube account, which should be set up for you. Just try logging in with your student email and make sure that it works. So for this first week, if you want, you can just watch what I'm doing. Or if you do get a hold of Premiere, I would encourage you to download this file to be able to work with. So that way you just have a video file. You can use a file that you have at home too. I just wanted to give you at least something to start off with. It's a little bit of a weird file. Then if we kind of look through, I have some other links that you can use as resources. So I have the Adobe Tool Panel. This is going to be a helpful resource in just going over the different tools and giving a better description of them. I get a lot of questions about people who want to purchase materials to kind of help them with starting up their own lighting kits and trying to find nice cheap options. So I have these resources. You don't have to go out and purchase anything, but if you're just interested in things that you can buy that are going to help with your video editing and your video capture, you can definitely check these out. Sharing files and folders with Creative Cloud. If you're interested in being able to use that, you can check out that link. And then this is a link to a channel that I think is really great. They go over some really great ideas on different types of directing and editing. So I would really encourage you to, if you're really interested in video, watch movies, figure out how people are editing information. I really like several of these. Like I like the Cohen reverse shot. Akira Kurosawa has some really interesting composition. They're a very notable Japanese director. Here we got Edgar Wright, how to do visual comedy. Jackie Chan, how to do action comedy. So it's just kind of looking at how people have used different directing styles. It's not something you have to do for the class, but it's just a resource that you might be interested in. I also really like this one, Satoshi Kon, Editing Space and Time. This is a really great one, especially if you're interested in montage. All right, so I've downloaded this file, Cathedral Smoke. What I like about it is it's a very atypical aspect ratio. So it was kind of a great way to explore working with the settings in Premiere. But I'm going to go ahead and open up Premiere Pro. And something that I should warn you is when you are opening up Premiere Pro, you want to make sure that your headphones are plugged in before you open up the software. The software is going to use whichever settings you currently have for your audio. So if you plug in your headphones after you open it, you're going to have to go into the software settings and change your input. Another option is you could save and close out of Premiere and then just open it up again. But that is something that you might encounter if you plug in your headphones afterwards. So I usually suggest making sure that you have your headphones plugged in beforehand. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new project. In the computer labs, I suggest being careful of where you save your files to. A lot of times the software is going to save to the last location the previous person saved. So if you're just saving it as entitled to wherever the default is, you could end up losing your file. So I suggest hitting browse first, choosing a location. I'll just do the desktop, and then I'll do demo, and then just hit OK. So we're basically going to just take a look at the different panels and get an idea for where everything is. Usually I like to start at the top right. So here we have help. This is actually where you can go to sign in. Usually when you need to sign in, it'll actually prompt you before it even opens up. At the end of class, you're going to want to make sure that you sign out. So that way another student doesn't sign into your account. So to do that, you would go to sign out. This is also where you would go to look up information about updates or anything else. And then what I really like is the window menu where we can look at different workspaces. This is where if there is a particular panel that you want to use that's not viewable, you can go and select it and it'll bring it up for you to look at. Under workspaces, we have several different presets. These are going to change it so that way, depending on what you're working on, you can kind of choose different preset arrangements. I really like editing. This is pretty much what I use when teaching this class. I also like working with effects, so you might use that as well. And what you'll notice is there's actually these same different presets at the top. You don't want to get these confused with the actual panels. These are actually the settings that you will click on to switch between these different workspaces. Something that I really like about the workspaces is we can actually change them around. So right now we have these 4 different panels. I can hover over these barriers and I can actually move them around if I want to. I can grab these individual tabs and I can actually move them. If you click and hold down and move them, you can actually see they kind of highlight this blue color. You can drop them into a new location if you want. Sometimes if you accidentally move things around and you get lost and you want to reset it, you can go back to workspaces and you can actually say reset to save layout. and that'll move everything back. So if you accidentally click on something, you don't know what you did, you can always go back and do that. You can also go to save as new workspace. So if we do this, I could save this as Whitney's workspace, hit OK. And so if there's, let's say there's different workspaces that you want to use depending on different types of work that you're doing, you could save your own workspace, and it even shows up here. And then if you change your mind, we can always remove it. I just need to make sure that I select something else first, and then I'm going to go to edit, click on Whitney's workspace, and then delete it. So I don't have it anymore. All right, so there's these other windows that you can look at. View, playback resolution. Something to point out with the playback resolution is this is going to help. This is going to be a setting that is based off of previewing the content. It's not actually going to change the content when you export the video. If you are editing on, let's say, a laptop, the laptop might have a harder time with rendering the video as you're editing it. So in order to make it easier for your computer to run the program, sometimes you'll want to cut back the resolution so it's only showing you a quarter of the resolution or maybe an eighth of the resolution. It's not going to affect the final video at all. It will preview in the window so that way it doesn't look as nice. It'll look more pixelated, but it's not going to affect things. It's just for the sake of being able to cut back on the graphic intensity of the project. There's also some options in here to show different guidelines. This can help with making sure that your information is title safe. Here we have the option of working with graphics and bringing in different Adobe fonts if you wanted to. Markers, you can add in markers to help mark points where you might want to do certain edits. Sequences. A sequence is what your actual file is going to be called. You're going to work with your files in the timeline. You can create multiple sequences. So for example, if you had a really large project and you wanted to edit each scene as its own individual sequences, you could do that. If you need to change your sequence settings, you can go here. I'm actually going to bring in this file because I can give you the example. So there's going to be a couple ways you can bring in the file. You can go to File, Import, and I can select my file and I can import it. Or what I usually like to do is I like to just click it and drag and drop it in. I just want to make sure I bring it into this bottom part where we have the project tab. Some of the things that we're going to look at in here, we can't see unless we have a file. So that's why I jumped ahead and did that. So here I have this file. Now, if we go to the sequence settings, I'm going to go ahead and drop the file onto the timeline. So by doing that, I was able to create a sequence that is just based off of this name of the file. Now it's called Castle Smoke. Here we can see it on the timeline. Now, if I go to sequence settings, it's saying that it's custom. You'll notice this aspect ratio is really weird. It's this really long, thin aspect ratio. So if I wanted to export it and I wanted it to have more of the ratio of a standard video, I could actually go in here and I could change the resolution, kind of overwrite the sequence settings that were inherited from that previous video. I could hit OK. It'll give me a warning. And now instead, it'll essentially add in these black bars, which if I were to upload this to YouTube anyways, YouTube's already going to do that. So I might as well. This is how you could go in and you could fix, let's say you have a video that you did record vertically and you drag it into your timeline and now your sequence is showing up vertically. You could go into the sequence settings and you could change it so that way it has a 1280 by 720 or basically 16 by 9 ratio, and that would work fine. There are some settings under clip that we're going to look at a little bit more later, like grouping and all of that. Under edit, we have our basic cut, copy, paste. Depending on if you are on a PC, you'll find preferences, and this is where you're going to go to change general preferences and settings. Here we have new project sequence. So at the beginning, we create a new project. We could create a new sequence. I'm just going to hit OK, and it's going to create a new tab. So the nice thing about this is we can, like I said, we can have multiple scenes from a project that we're working on, and we could develop them separately. So we could have the same footage that we're bringing in and be able to use it for both of these projects at the same time, but they can be built up in parts instead. We are going to take a look at the export settings, but once we are ready to export out our video, we're going to go to export. When we save our file, and we can go ahead and hit save, it's saving that workspace. So the project isn't a video yet, it's just a workspace that has shortcut links to these files. So it's kind of a list of instructions at this point. It's not an actual video. You'll actually see here is this demo.prproj. It's a file that you can only open in Premiere. You're not able to open it in a media player. So you want to make sure that you actually export your video first. All right, so we've gone through that top menu and we've looked at these workspaces. So next, kind of going around, we have this source window. This allows you to preview content. So for example, I had this video, and just by double clicking on it, it brings this preview up of that video. So that's a preview of my individual files. Here I have some options for how large I want this preview to be. I can just select fit. I have a time code. This will say what time my playhead is at. Here we have the option of dragging video only or dragging audio. So what I can do is I can actually import just one or the other to my timeline if I wanted to. I can also change the playback resolution for the preview. Again, this doesn't affect the final video. This is just a way to cut back on the graphic intensity of trying to render it. Here are some different setting options that you can select. Here we can add different markers. You can mark in a point, and then we can mark out a point. So if there was just a particular part that you wanted to bring in, you could use the markers. Here we have go to the in point, go to the out point. So if you want an easy way to kind of hop around, here we can go frame by frame through the content. So we could kind of preview it. And then we could also just play it at the regular speed. Here we have the option of inserting. Now, when we're bringing in content, it's going to insert wherever this playhead is unless we're clicking and dragging it. So you want to be careful so you don't accidentally overwrite files that are already here. So if I click on insert, it's going to push aside content on the left and the right side of that playhead, and it's actually letting it nest inside of these. If I click on overwrite, it actually replaces the content that's in that spot. Here I have export frame, so I can actually take a still shot of that one frame. Now going to this bottom left, this is where we actually have all our files. So when we're importing files, they're going to end up here. And once you create a sequence, you're actually going to see the sequence in here as well. So it can get a little confusing, but you can kind of tell the difference between the sequence because it has this little icon in it. So here we have Castle Smoke, and then we have our sequence one. So if we wanted to, I could actually delete that and get rid of it, but it's still here and accessible. So we can search for our files in here if we wanted to. There's also some other options. Here we can click on list view, or we can switch to an icon view. So depending on what is easier for you to browse through information, When we're looking at this view, we have this option of changing these labels. So for example, right now the sequence colors are all green. If you right click on it and you go to label, you can actually choose different colors if you want. So if you wanted to change all of your B-roll footage to a certain color, you could. Maybe you want all your interview footage to be one color. That's kind of up to you. If you are in the picture mode, there's a slider for you to be able to change the size of the images. You can create a new bin. This is basically just a name for creating a folder. So you can put different files inside of a folder. You can also create a new item, or you can select an item and you can delete it. Media Browser allows you to browse through the content of your computer. Libraries allows for you to link to content that is stored in your library. So if you had certain color palettes or different logos that you were using, you could create them, save them to your library and be able to use them. That's one of the benefits of using Adobe software. Info, effects. This is where a bunch of different effects will be located. We're going to look at these more in a future week, but if you were interested in applying different video effects or video transitions, this is where you would find them. Here we have our different markers, and then this is really nice. We have our history. So if you end up wanting to go back and change something, you can do kind of the typical Control-Z to undo, but you can also go to this history panel. Usually I'm just going to leave it on project demo. Now moving up to the right, once we move our content over to the timeline, these basically work with each other. On the bottom we have our timeline, and the top we have the preview. Whatever is on this screen is essentially what's going to actually render out and be your video. So when we start editing, putting text on here, we'll be able to preview it over here. So this is going to be really similar to our source panel. In the program panel, we're going to be able to change this fit if we want to. So if you really wanted to zoom in close, you can see we have this playhead up here, but we also have the one on the timeline. We can add different markers here. Here we can mark in and out as well. You can go to the endpoint, or we could go to the endpoint. This would go to the last part of your clips. This would allow us to step through, or we could just play through. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Here we have lift. These would do the opposite of what we were looking at. Here we have comparison view. We have different settings. One setting that I really like is working with loop. So if you were previewing your content and you were playing through, it's going to automatically start over from the beginning. And to play by default, if you just hit the space bar, it will play. You don't necessarily have to go and select start, stop each time. There's going to be some other settings in here that we can take a look at. Some of these are redundant, like playback, resolution. There's going to be multiple ways for you to access a lot of this content. So don't get too overwhelmed. Now going to the tool menu, there is the selection tool. This allows us to move the content around on our timeline. You'll notice that it kind of has a smart snap, so it'll kind of anticipate where you might want things to line up. This can be really helpful. When you have these individual pieces, if you hover over the edges, you'll see this arrow. If you click on it and drag out, you can actually add that content back. So if you brought in a small clip or you accidentally deleted part of one, you can actually resize it so it's not lost forever. Again, it's a shortcut to the actual file, so it's always capable of having the rest of that information. Here we have the track select forward tool. What this does is it essentially controls all of the files that are to the right and moves everything all at once. Otherwise, if we were selecting one thing, let's say I'm moving this file, I'm essentially overwriting the file that's next to it, and it eventually disappears. So What's nice about using this tool is I can move everything without having to go in and select every individual piece. So it retains its relationship. In the other way, I have select backward tool. So that's really helpful too. Ripple edit tool. So what I would suggest for these is taking a look at this link that I have on Canvas. That's going to go over these different tools. If you scroll down, it's going to describe them as a technical definition. So we have Ripple edit tool. This tool, select this tool to trim the in and out point of a clip in a timeline. And a lot of these you'll probably understand a little bit more if you just try playing around with them. Rolling edit tool, select this tool to roll the edit point between two clips. So these are mostly working with affecting two clips at a single point and kind of changing them. Here we can switch to this one. There's also this rate stretch tool. This one can change the rate. There's gonna be other ways for us to do this, so I'm not a huge fan of this. I'd rather use the right click and then change the speed duration instead. The razor tool lets you cut your video into different pieces, so that way you can move them around. Maybe you want to change the order that they're going to go in. But again, just because you cut it, it doesn't mean that you can't change these points. You can always bring them back if you need to. Here we have the slip tool and the slide tool. These are going to affect 3 clips that are next to each other. The video that I have isn't the best for demonstrating these just because the video all looks the same, so you can't really see much of a difference. But I would suggest trying these out. We can go back to reading the description. Slip tool, select this tool to simultaneously change the in and out points of the clip in a timeline while keeping the same span between them constant. Slide tool, select this tool to move a clip to the left or right in a timeline while simultaneously trimming the 2 clips that surround it. So it's kind of a different combination of which parts are being affected. Pen tool, rectangle tool, ellipse tool. This is going to be really helpful for when we want to start creating masks and editing out content. We're going to look at working with green screen, and so we're going to be able to use this to mask off a particular area. Hand tool will allow for you to move content around. And then we have our text tool. The text tool can be a little bit difficult to get used to. One of the hardest things that I think people have a hard time with is when they are trying to select one, they might accidentally create multiple instances of the text. They're all still part of the same text, but each time you try to click on the text that you have, you might accidentally create a new one. So I have noticed that it ends up being a little difficult. So try to be careful with that. You will notice that when you do have text that you've added, it'll create this little layer down here that will stack over top of whatever you have. What is nice about this though is we can move our text around. I can click back in it and I can edit it if I need to. If I hold down, I have also the option of doing vertical type. Yeah, you'll see I already accidentally made one. It's so finicky. So going to this sequence panel now, we have the title, which was based off of our project. We have the timeline. There's different settings that we can look at. You'll notice that we have different layers. By default, content is going to go onto V1 for the video and then A1 for the audio. And your files will be linked together. You can unlink these. So if I right click and I go to unlink, what's going to happen is this audio is going to be separate from the video. So this could be really helpful if you wanted to do a voiceover, or maybe you have a slideshow of different pictures or something, and then you bring in audio from another file. So that's something you could do with this first project if you wanted. you have the option of locking a layer. So let's say you have everything figured out for one layer and you don't want to accidentally move things. You could lock that in place. You can also mute a track if you want to, or you can, if you have a microphone set up, you can actually record. Chances are in the lab, you're not going to be able to do that. So that's something you would have to do at home. If we play through this, you will notice audio over here where you want to make sure that your audio levels aren't getting to the point where they're in the red. So you want to kind of double check. A lot of times when students are exporting out their audio, usually it's either too quiet or too loud. So you don't want to just judge your audio levels based off of the playback in your headphones, because you could just have different settings than other people. You want to try to aim for the point where your audio is kind of showing up kind of in the orange range, but not getting to the point where it's in the red and it's actually peaking and clipping off the top of those audio waves. So as we move around, you'll notice there's these sliders with these little handlebars. You can move this whole slider and it'll let you go through your timeline. You can click on these endpoints and you can change essentially how zoomed in you are. So usually when I'm working, I go back and forth between using these, and it's just something that you have to use over and over again before you get used to it. It is a little unwieldy at first. There's also these sliders here. This allows you to zoom in to your individual video tracks, and then you also have the option of zooming in, and this is going to be really great for being able to actually see your waveforms, to be able to see more information. Now, some panels that we didn't look at yet, we have the effect controls up here next to this source tab. This is where when we start adding effects, we'll be able to see them. We also have the audio clip mixer. So this will show you your audio levels for your files. You'll notice that there's L and R. This is talking about the left and right stereo channels. By default, this will be in the center. We also have this volume slider here. So if your audio was too quiet or too loud, you could change the decibel volume of your audio. We're going to go over that more next week, so you don't have to worry about that too much. So I'm going to go over how to export your file. But before we do that, I'm going to show you some things that you want to check. So usually I suggest double checking the end of your file. Usually you'll have a bunch of files, and then as you're working, you might use the space to the right as just free space to help you organize things and shift them around. And you might accidentally abandon something over at the end. What's going to happen when you export your video is it's going to export out this whole video. And if you accidentally leave something at the end, you're going to have this blank screen for, however long this is, 20 minutes or whatever. And then you're going to have this little bit at the end. So I suggest double checking that you don't have anything. And then I also suggest making sure that you have your actual sequence selected. Sometimes I've had students before end up doing some weird things when they end up exporting. A lot of times when we're working with software that's a little bit more complex, it assumes that you know what you're doing, and that the thing that you're doing that might be weird is specific, like you're specifically doing it. So it's not necessarily going to hold your hand the whole way. So for example, something that I've had a student do before was they accidentally left selected one of the files that they were working on here. They went to export the video, and instead of exporting the sequence, they actually exported out their file that they were bringing in. So it was a really random error, and I've never had anyone else do it, but I just like to suggest, select on your sequence just to make sure that nothing weird ends up happening. And again, double check to see that there's nothing at the end. So we're going to go to File, Export Media, and we're going to want to choose the option Format H.264. This is going to turn your file into an MP4 file. If you were to save your file as an AVI file, that's going to be a proprietary file for PC computers. So if you were to give that file to someone who's working on a Mac, they might not be able to view it. Same thing with the QuickTime file. That's probably the most common one that you'll see on a Mac computer. That's specific to working with a Mac. So an H.264 is probably the most common file type that is easily viewable by all computers. So that's what I suggest to use. A lot of times you can just choose match source. But if you wanted to, you could also select YouTube 1080p. You do want to make sure that you choose P. P means progressive. There is also the option of I, which is for interlaced. You're going to see it less often, so you're probably not going to accidentally select it. But I have had students do that before. Then you can click on this output name. It's not really obvious what this is doing, but if you click on this, this is going to be what it's going to name your file as and where you're going to save it to. So we can save it to the desktop. We want to make sure it has a different name than the original file, which it looks like it's naming it _1, which is fine. We'll hit save. Here we have the option of exporting the video and the audio. So if you only wanted one or the other, you could do that. Here we can change the video settings if we want. But for the most part, you just want it to match to your sequence settings, so it should be fine. Here we have the option of exporting it or queuing it. So if we export it, it's going to export inside of Premiere Pro. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. You'll notice that it's going to take quite a while to export your files. So you want to make sure that you provide time for that. The more editing and the larger the files are, the longer it's going to take. When you are editing your files too, let's say that you have a flash drive, you want to make sure that you move your files from your flash drive to a computer, and then when you're done, move them back to your flash drive. If you're trying to access your files from your flash drive, and then if you go to export it, it's going to take it a lot longer because it's having to read those files from the flash drive instead of the local storage on the computer. The other option is to do queue. You can only do this if you have Adobe Media Encoder, but Media Encoder gives you a lot more options for how you want to export your files. It also has the benefit of being able to export multiple files at a time. So I've known a lot of students who like to work in animation or other programs where they are needing to render out a bunch of files. So this can really help. Like if it's going to take, I've had some students where they were working on a project that took 8 hours to render out. So rather than having to sit around and wait for one video to render and then start another one, you can do a batch render and render them all at the same time. So Media Encoder is really great for that. Let's say also you had a bunch of audio files that were MP3s and you needed to change the format of them to a WAV file. You can easily just drop in 50 files, set them all up, hit render, and then it'll go ahead and change those files for you. That way you don't have to open them up and save them individually. So in here, it looks a little bit different. We're basically looking at the files over here. Here you can look at your files and look them up on your local computer. We're going to look at the drop-down menu. There's going to be more options for you to select here. We're going to just click on H.264. Again, we have this option of picking the different type of video that we want. I'm just going to use this YouTube option. Here I can choose the file name. That's fine. And then we have ready. And then when you're really ready, you can hit play and it'll go ahead and start rendering for you. It'll give us a little preview of what's happening. And again, I'm going to go ahead and stop it because we don't really need to go through this. So that gives you kind of a full idea of what to expect as far as the workspace goes. I'm going to go over these menus and everything again, so that way you get more practice with it. I just wanted to give you an introduction. So going back to Canvas, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the first project. The first project, I like to call it a self-portrait. Really what I'm looking for is a video of you introducing yourself. You could think of it as your elevator speech. I've had some students who use it as an opportunity to tell us a little bit about their businesses. I've had some students where their background is fine art, so they might do like an artist statement. I've had other students who want to create a demo reel, so they basically just did a little introduction and then they created a demo reel of work that they've recorded before. So it's kind of up to you. I just want you to give us an idea of who you are through this video. So the objective upon completion of this project, you should be able to perform the basic operations of video capture, file management, and importing and exporting of media. You should understand video compression techniques and be able to save and upload videos for submission on YouTube and Canvas. Assignment, record a 3 to 5 minute approximate video. Now, that's just the content you're recording. We're going to be editing it down into a much smaller video. It's going to basically be a real short elevator speech, like 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minute approximate video. You don't really want to go over 2 minutes. In the video, you'll give a brief introduction to who you are, what your educational career aspirations are, and some of your interests. You can record multiple takes and angles. There must be at least one shot of yourself, but you do not have to be the focus for the whole video. Consider recording footage of what you discussed in the video. Bring all footage to the second class period to begin working on editing. So I'm going to need you to record everything before next class. If you have any questions, you can send me an email, or you can come in during my office hours. But you're going to need something to work with to edit. We're going to do a demonstration and we're going to work with some materials first. But you are going to have time in class to start working on this project next time. You can use a flash drive, external hard drive, OneDrive, or Google Drive to access your footage. Have the footage ready by the beginning of class and ready to work on it. In class, you will import all recorded footage to Premiere and begin editing it into a new sequence. Looking through your source footage, you will curate a 1 to 2 minute approximate video. So try to record more than what you need. It's good to do multiple takes so that way you have plenty of material to work with. Feel free to combine and or switch audio tracks from different clips. You should have at least 3 obvious edits to your video and or audio. Once your video is completed, export it as a format H.264. So this is just to give you an idea of what settings you're going to want to pick. The video will be turned in using YouTube. You will be expected to create a YouTube account in which to upload your videos for grading. Videos must be completed, uploaded, and included a brief description. So you're going to upload your video to YouTube. Then you're going to take that address and you're going to post that address onto YouTube. I've included some examples of student work so that way you can kind of see what people have done. I just have a couple of self-portraits. The rest of these are going to be for the final project. If you want to go ahead and watch those too, you can. I often am having to change these out because students end up taking them down. So right now I just have 2 examples that you can watch on your own. But students have kind of taken these in multiple directions. It just kind of depends on what you want to do. So if you have questions on that, you can send me an email. So for next time, start recording footage for your self-portrait. Make sure you bring in some footage. If you want to, you can also bring in photos. So if you want to create a slideshow, or if you have pictures that you want to use to illustrate topics that you're talking about in your video, you can definitely do that too. But bring materials to work with for the self-portrait. Make sure that your YouTube account is working with your student email. Get access to Premiere Pro by using an Adobe subscription. And make sure that you post to the introduction discussion. That's going to be how I mark attendance. And if you could, fill out the student information sheet so that way you can hand that in and I can get a better idea about you. All right, so that's going to be everything for this week. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or stop by my office hours. All right, I'll see you next week.